Morning, class 8ers. It's been a long time. So today we are going to do about a poetry written by the famous Indian poet Rabindranath Tagore, where he has won many awards. He has won the Nobel Prize in 1913 for Gitanjali. And today we are going to do a poem called Where the Mind is Without Fear. As you know, we are in a lockdown, we are in a quarantine right now in this present situation where we have a lot of fears. The fear we might fall sick, fear we might be in quarantine outside. So in order to deal with the fear of a mind, today I'm going to teach you about a poet called Where a Mind is Without Fear. This poem was written by Rabindranath Tagore, who was a Bengali writer. He was a musician, he was a poet, he was a dancer, he was a painter. He was good what he did. And this poem he wrote in a time where Indians, our country, were in a bondage. In a pre-independent time where the Britishers had oppressed the entire country. As the continuation of our previous line of my introduction, so I would love to recite the first line where he says, where the mind is without fear, where the head held high. Here he talks about a mind in a captivity, a mind with fear, a mind with sorrow, a mind full of anguish, a mind full of sorrow. And the poet explains about having the head held high. Here, head held high means to have the self-respect, or in a simple word, we can call it dignity. At that period of time where our people were struggling for the independence, he wanted to convey the people that you need to have your own self-respect. You need to have your own dignity, which people were lacking. So looking at these circumstances, the poet wanted to convey the message to people that no matter what happens to the situation, you need to have your own self-respect. You need to have your own dignity. The second line says, where knowledge is free. When we talk about free or a freedom, freedom is always free. Free will have no cost in it. Freedom, when we think about freedom, it frees your mind, it makes you happy. But here freedom in this context refers to the knowledge. At that time, the most precious thing was knowledge, where you had to earn, where you had to pay. And only Britishers and the high class of the Indian society were allowed to have this knowledge, which was free. So the poet wanted to convey that knowledge can be attained everywhere in every day of our life. In nature, as you know, Rabindranath Tagore was a nature poet. He wanted people to know that people can gain knowledge not only through books, but through knowledge, through situations and circumstances. And in the third line, he says, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls. When we talk about narrow domestic walls, we are in a narrow domestic wall right now. That is in a house, the four corner of a house where we are quarantined, where we cannot go anywhere. We cannot see other people except for the people living in the house. So in this context, people were quarantined within themselves, in their thoughts, in their belief system. There were a lot of barriers among themselves. There were a lot of caste system, there were a lot of dowry system, there were a lot of touchable and untouchables. The belief system had quarantined themselves. There were no freedom in the thoughts, there were no liberty in the speech as well. So that's why the domestic war, which the poet talks out here, it's about the political, about the society that they were living in. But they were not fragmented. That means they were not totally destroyed among themselves. They still had a hope within themselves. The next line he says, where the words come out from the depth of truth. And truth, when we hear this word truth, it always reminds us the purity in heart, a purity in mind, a purity in soul. So Rabindranath Tagore, as a poet, as a literate, he wanted people to know that to find the truth. In other words, he wanted people to think about how they were living, how they were reacting to each other, how they were reacting to the societal norms that the Britishers had laid, that the old forefathers had laid. He wanted people to be free. He wanted people to know about the situation that they were living in.